Hey everyone, my name is Poisonblade and I hope all of you are having a good day. So for today's video, I'm going to be not building any animal habitats or anything including animals actually. I'm going to be revisiting one of my old builds from the old version of Kayan al-Bashar, namely Squirrels Tavern. And just to give you a spoiler alert on how the end result turned out, yeah, it doesn't look anywhere like the old version of Squirrels Tavern. The new version could basically be completely non-inspired by the old version. However, I do want to give you guys a bit of insight on how large today's build is, and it required 3 different blueprints just to get it into the actual Kayan al-Bashar, because right now I'm not building in the actual Kayan al-Bashar because it's a huge build that usually works a little bit better if I don't build it in Kayan al-Bashar anymore. But anyway, with that being said, let's get straight into today's video. So, as I said, the old version of Squirrels Tavern might as well not exist for this build. I am going to show it to you guys, but you can really see it doesn't look anywhere like what we're building today. The only thing that I think remains are really the arches in the windows and such. But before I really get into the actual build and such, yeah, I'm not doing the proper YouTube thing, which is, well, basically as soon as a new pack gets released, a lot of creators will jump on the new animals and build habitats for them. This is in no way shaming those people, because I would have done that as well. But as soon as the pack got released, all of the ideas that I had for the new animals basically went poof. And then I got a load of ideas for builds that wouldn't be able to include the new animals. So I was thinking like, oh, should I, try and morph some of these builds to include the new animals? Because, again, it's like the proper YouTube thing to play with what's new. But then I just thought like, A, if I will sit on these ideas for too long, they will become wonky. And B, if I try to morph builds that, even in just the idea stage, weren't including any animals, then it's not going to really work in the end, because then it will basically just be like forcing an animal into a build where it doesn't really belong. So yeah, today's build isn't going to include any of the new animals, and the next build is also not going to include any of the new animals, and even more similarly, the next build won't include any animals, because I am just in one of those moods where I just want to build buildings and not really think about the animals. I mean, I could build the next build with lemurs, but it would be kind of forced in there. So yeah, it would also probably be a little bit weird, because the next build is going to be a brothel. I've built 2 of those so far for Kayan al-Bashar, and it's going to be the 3rd one, but I don't have a problem. But it just makes somewhat sense that like right next to the tavern you have the brothel. Like, it kind of makes sense. And also, yes, I think that the space that Squirrels Tavern is going to be in, which is right next to the other habitat, it's probably like a little bit more high class of an area just because of Squirrels Tavern. Like, as you will see, Squirrels Tavern is huge. Well, compared to all the buildings that are there so far. And just to give you an idea of like what I, well, basically what goes on in my mind when I'm thinking of the area that we're currently going to be building for, which is the suburbs of Kayan al-Bashar. Yeah, it's not the best place, because in just my lore version of Kayan al-Bashar, the suburbs of Kayan al-Bashar, like even the locals, are hesitant to go there after the sun has gone down. Yeah, that just gives you an idea of like, if even the locals of Kayan al-Bashar are hesitant to go there at dark or at night, then you probably wouldn't stand a chance at day. And I don't think that the suburbs of Kayan al-Bashar are like complete slums and such, but I do think that like the poorest of Kayan al-Bashar live there, and I mean, it's the place you would go to if you're like looking for like a blade to hire, basically if you're looking for an assassin, or looking for that special kind of poison, like that's the place to go. But then as soon as the sun goes down, nobody is safe. And this again shows that Kayan al-Bashar is really, well, most of my builds are just really dark, but I imagine that like if a noble goes missing in the suburbs of Kayan al-Bashar, the family actually don't want them to be found. Because I just came up with this story of one noble actually turning up after he went missing in pieces. nailed to his front door, with his genitals sewed into his mouth. Yeah, you don't want to turn up after you've gone missing in the suburbs of Kayan al-Bashar. Just spare your family that sight. But anyway, so the next video, I'm going to talk a bit about the next video because it is going to include a lot of lore. Because I was thinking of like talking about the lore a lot in today's video, just because I mean it's a tavern, and I just thought, well, I always see my channels, sometimes see my channel as kind of like me being that drunk guy at the bar who you shouldn't give any more drinks, but has some intriguing stories to tell. It would make sense to talk about the lore when I'm building a tavern, but I mean Squirrels Tavern is just a little bit too large to not talk about the actual build. But in the next video, when I'm building the brothel, and another thing that's going to help with the lore, because, well, I want to talk about the fate of Tianopolis and the Kingdom of Arcado and the Shadow Cities, because, yes, I went really extra just to make up an explanation, or like an in-world or in-lore explanation for why you won't ever see Tianopolis again. So I'm going to probably tell that story in the next video. Yes, I have built up an entire world for not only Kayan al-Bashar, but also Valhalla, Ozaru, and Tianopolis. And it also includes places that you're never going to see, unless like, well, maybe one of these places you will see if like Planet Coaster 2 or Planet Zoo 2 is ever going to come. Like maybe we'll visit one of these places that I brought, or yeah, thought about. Yeah, I'm building an entire world for a video game that is about zoos. I have this really big lore behind everything that I built, and then have smaller lore for individual builds and such. Like, everything in Kayan al-Bashar, everything in Valhalla and such, like they used to be separate places. Like Kayan al-Bashar used to be tied to our world through like the, the Rub al Khali Desert in Saudi Arabia, or on the Arabian Peninsula actually, because I think it's like it's to the south of like the Arabian Peninsula, or in the southern part. And then Valhalla used to be this kind of mystical place, also somewhat tied to our world, but now I've just made the decision like, yeah, they might be tied to our world through like some portals here and there, but it is going to be a complete world on its own that's completely like, you know, Ozaru and Kayan al-Bashar might have a trade route going between them. Probably because, I mean, Ozaru is, well, it's inspired by East Asia and such, and usually that means, well, Kayan al-Bashar is kind of set in like the 1600s, or at least that's the comparable age in our world. You bet that Kayan al-Bashar wants those silks and all of it that Ozaru can deliver. Although I think Ozaru is like a tiny trade post of like a very large Eastern empire. Also, like, Kayan al-Bashar is the capital of an empire. Tianopolis is not the capital of Arcado, or like the kingdom that it's in. Tianopolis is actually like the smallest of the 4 big cities. I'm going to talk a little bit too much now about the actual story of Arcado, Tianopolis, and the Shadow City, so I should stop myself there. And then Valhalla is just a valley in the, well, it's not a kingdom, but it's just a realm that I named by Guardian. I have gone way too extra when it comes to the lore of this entire world, and I just want to talk about it, and in the next video I am going to talk about it. Or at least, I'm going to talk about Arcado, Tianopolis, and the Shadow Cities, which again is just an in-lore or in-world explanation for why you will never see Tianopolis on the channel again, because, well, in real life the save file is just too broken to ever really work again. But anyway, that's going to be for the next video. Let's now start talking about the actual build of today, even though we're 10 minutes into the video. Yeah, as I said, Squirrels Tavern, it's inspired by the old version, but the old version could just as well be a completely separate building, because it doesn't look anywhere like the new version. First of all, the old version didn't have a tower. The new version is going to have 2. I'm building one right now. Also, the old version didn't have any domes. Yeah, this build ended up with 5 domes. Well, 3 actual domes and then 2 spiry domes on top of towers, because it's Squirrels Tavern. So I like to climb things, so I'm going to add towers just so that I can climb those things. And this is the thing, again, I'm going to talk a little bit about the lore here, but with Tianopolis and Kayan al-Bashar, somewhat self-inserted myself into the lore as like the ruler of these places, but I mean, Tianopolis, yeah, I'm going to talk about that in the next video, but with Kayan al-Bashar, I sort of just backtracked on that, and now I'm just the owner of Squirrels Tavern. Like, I'm not the ruler of Kayan al-Bashar anymore. That's like, a lot of this lore, like, I like to talk about it, but a lot of it isn't really set in stone. And yes, I'm going to do like a major overhaul of the lore summary that I've made that's on the Discord, but yeah, it's now really outdated because I've just made a lot of changes. Yeah, when it comes to the new version of Squirrels Tavern, I mean, I am the owner, I'm not the barkeep, because anytime I just envision like the barkeep for Squirrels Tavern, I just imagine this like really big, burly guy, like this really tough looking guy. And for some reason, I just always envision him as like, again, this big tough guy, but then he has a cat, which if you even just look at the cat in the wrong way, he will smash your face in. Yeah, like this just big burly guy, but then, or big burly tough guy, and then he has like this really sweet spot for a cat. Yes, another thing with the new version of Squirrels Tavern, I really wanted to avoid the shape of the original one, because the original Squirrels Tavern, it's kind of crappy in a good nostalgic way, but it really was just this giant box. Like, it was a giant flat box. There was not really any height difference in the building. There weren't really bump outs or anything. Like, nowadays I really like just having like bump outs, like having extensions to a build just to break up a flat wall. Back then I didn't really do that. I mean, the station had like these huge towers which broke the old version of Kayan al-Bashar, because one tower was like 1,500, no, not even 1,500, 15,000 pieces, because the end result for the station was like 150,000 pieces, or 130, which back then, I think I could run the old version of Kayan al-Bashar on my PC right now, but back then, it wouldn't. So, yeah. Also, I just made sure to make the new version of Squirrels Tavern a lot more colorful. I settled on this weird bluish color. I wanted to turn it green because this is the weird thing with the channel. Like, the background for the squirrel, or the profile pic of the channel, is red, but then red is not my favorite color. My favorite color is green. I've mentioned this a couple of times in my videos, so I'm just like, why did I make the background of the profile picture red? But now I'm just like, I don't want to change it anymore. So it's just like, yeah, my favorite color is green, but then the profile picture has a red background, and then Squirrels Tavern is blue, so I'm not really consistent with colors. You bet your ass that I just built this rounded extension just so that I could fit a dome on there, because, I mean, Squirrels Tavern, I just really wanted to go the extra mile with this build. Again, end result was that it required 3 different blueprints just to get it into actual Kayan al-Bashar. I wanted to just have domes again, because after the Hagia Sophia build, I was kind of just like, I am over domes. Like, I don't even remember how many domes there are on the Hagia Sophia build. Way too many. Well, not too many because it works, but it was just way too many to build. But after that, I sort of stopped building domes, just because I built way too many in too short of a time span. And now I'm in Squirrels Tavern, and I've built 5 domes, or at least 3 normal domes, and then 2 spiry domes. And yes, you could see this as I can just trying to challenge myself to include as many domes into a building again, and not really care about build piece count. I mean, when have I ever cared about how many pieces I use? Yeah, it's a fun build, and especially with this like rounded bump out or this rounded extension, I really just wanted that view into the dome. I was for a second going to build another dome in it so that I could have like a decoration on the inside without it showing on the outside, but then I just thought like, yeah, maybe I'm just going a little bit crazy. Also, I really love the new otter statues, because on top of the domes in our world or in real life, you usually have like the symbol of Islam, but then Kayan al-Bashar isn't tied to any real world religion, so having like a moon on a dome wouldn't really make sense in Kayan al-Bashar. But having an otter on top of a dome somehow does. I mean, it does still have like this similar shape with some of the other statues, and I also like the seal statues. However, the penguin statues, this is a rare thing, but they are a little bit too derpy for me. And I usually like derpy statues, but for some reason the penguin statues that we've got were a little bit too derpy for this build. Also, yes, I used them as like gargoyles, the other statues, because, I mean, what I'm building right now is the second of 2 towers, and yeah, I've just called it Squirrel's Roost, because this is the tower that I would stay in, because it's the highest tower, and I didn't put a door or like a entryway into the top part of the tower, because I just envisioned myself trying to climb the tower. Like, I definitely was the kid that was constantly climbing trees. I mean, I will still say to this day that just look up the Efteling entrance. The Efteling is an attraction park in the Netherlands, but just look up the entrance. I always say that I want to climb that building or climb that entrance just because of how interesting the roof is, and I still want to do that. But anyway, so yeah, that's kind of an explanation for why there's no entry or doorway into this actual tower or into the top part. Although, yeah, it's also an excuse because I just forgot to build it. Like, I should probably do it because, I mean, I don't, like, how would I get a drink up there? Think about the practicalities of it. But yeah, when it comes to the lore of Squirrels Tavern, as I said, I imagine myself as like this, well, as the owner of Squirrels Tavern, but not really like involved in the actual like innkeeping or tavern. I just envision like this big, burly, tough barman who has a really soft spot for a cat. And the way I actually included you guys into this build, and this is like, how can I include you guys in this build? Oh yeah, that way, is by having like a board with like the outstanding taps, I think you call it, or like open standing taps, where you know, you get a drink but you don't pay for it immediately and you put it on your tab. So yeah, you bet your ass that Estan and Beyond Drew are on there, and also Beatrice, Linnea. You know, you gotta pay your tabs, otherwise the barkeep or the barman Hakim is going to set Soraya on you. Yeah, Soraya's his cat. Although he says it's his cat, but then for most people it's you know, it's the size of a lion. So maybe pay your tab, because I mean, you know that if he sets Soraya on you, or Faraya, I still haven't really settled on any real name for the cat. Like, I know the barkeep is going to be Hakim, but I don't know what to name his cat. You know, if Soraya or Faraya doesn't get you, maybe he has 2 cats. That would be amazing. Like, just having this giant lion on the bar, just like watching you, playing with like a ball of yarn, and then the moment you're like, I can't pay for this, Soraya, get him or her. And it's like, you hurt Soraya. And then Hakim just comes all out and it's just like smashes half of your face in. It's like, you can pay with your teeth. Yeah, again, Kayan al-Bashar is really dark. The entire world is really dark because, as I said, in the next video I'm going to talk about like the story that I made up for why you won't see Tianopolis on the channel, but it's also a really dark story. It's going to be fun. And again, like, I should have probably talked about it in today's video because it makes sense to talk about the lore when you're building a tavern. But I have an idea on how to make it work in the next video, because I mean, I'm just going to be referencing a whole huge fantasy world that I've created where Kayan al-Bashar, Valhalla, and everything is set in. Well, everything besides Isla Pacifica. Isla Pacifica is kind of the odd one out when it comes to my projects. And yes, I went completely extra again because I made my own pathway. Well, I did that in the last video. I've been doing that for quite some time because I just like to have this kind of pathway. But I also made a terrace overlooking the other habitat because I mean, that was the idea right from the get-go. And I actually wanted to build Squirrels Tavern in the last video, but then I realized, yeah, the ideas that I have for this build are way too huge to put it into a video with an actual habitat as well. And now it's kind of surprising that for the next video there's also not going to be any habitats, because who says Planet Zoo is a zoo game? For me it's just a building simulator, I think. Well, building or world simulator. Because again, I'm going to talk about the story of Tianopolis and the Kingdom of Arcado and the Shadow Cities, where you don't want to go to the Shadow Cities. Yeah, I have a very interesting story about the Shadow Cities. And then, I mean, you don't have to go to Arcado or the Shadow Cities to, you know, get murdered, because the Squirrels Tavern and the other island is set in the suburbs of Kayan al-Bashar. And the locals don't want to go to the suburbs because the last guy that went to the suburbs went missing and was found in pieces, nailed to his front door with his genitals sewed into his mouth. So yeah, again, if the citizens or inhabitants of Kayan al-Bashar are hesitant of going somewhere, you should just avoid that place with all of your life. But anyway, that's going to be it for today's video. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. There's a like and subscribe button, there's a bell button, but by the time the bell button works, Arcado or the Shadow Cities are livable again. So yeah, that's never going to work. Anyway, hope you have a good day. Bye bye.